Fraud is no longer just a risk for auto dealers, it has become part of everyday operations. Experian Automotive's Fraud Protect solution helps you catch income, identity, and trade-in fraud in real time without slowing down the sale. Stop fraud. Keep deals moving. Experian Automotive's Fraud Protect.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Monday, August 24th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, the trade deal the U.S. and Canada reached last week got blown up, and now President Trump is threatening 50% tariffs. Unifor and GM have a tentative deal for a new contract, and an iconic off-road nameplate stages a comeback. Plus, Automotive News Canada Toronto Bureau Chief David Kennedy joins the show to talk about how the U.S. Canada trade talks imploded at the last minute, and whether there's an off-ramp after Trump's latest escalations.
The fact that Ottawa would retaliate against the United States is something that seems to irk him. Even though he obviously started this trade war with Canada, it seems to be a problem that Canada is willing to push back.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. Last time we talked, the U.S. and Canada had a tentative trade deal, but it all fell apart in the final hours of negotiations. Now, President Trump is threatening to dramatically escalate his trade war with Canada. Trump posted on Truth Social Sunday that he'll raise tariffs on all Canadian-made cars, trucks, auto parts, and steel to 50%, starting January 1st of next year. That's according to Reuters. Right now, auto tariffs only apply to content that does not comply with USMCA in vehicles built in Canada and shipped to the U.S. We'll have more on this story later in the show with David Kennedy of Automotive News Canada. The industry did get one deal done north of the border this weekend. Unifor and General Motors have reached tentative deals covering more than 4,600 workers at 4 Ontario plants, with ratification votes set for August 29th and 30th. The agreements were unanimously endorsed by Unifor's GM Master Bargaining Committee. They follow the pattern set by the union's earlier deal with Ford. That deal locked in 3% annual wage increases and $10,000 signing bonuses. If ratified, Unifor's next stop is the bargaining table with Stellantis. Mitsubishi is bringing back the Pajero, and it's got a launch date. The Japanese automaker confirmed the 5th-generation Pajero will make its global debut on September 2nd, ending a 5-year hiatus for the nameplate. The revived SUV will be built in Thailand on the Triton Pickup's ladder frame platform, blending off-road capability with modern digital tech. Mitsubishi also plans a new U.S. pickup. The moves are part of a push to reverse sliding sales and take on surging Chinese competitors in Southeast Asia. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. On the latest episode of the Automotive News Shift podcast, co-hosts Molly Boygon and Hannah Lutz talked about Waymo's biggest expansion yet. Waymo is now operating in 11 U.S. cities and targeting 1 million rides per week by year's end. Here's a piece of that conversation on Shift.
California regulators have signed off on Waymo's biggest expansion yet. Hannah, what are the details?
So this expansion now covers 18 counties across California, so that gives Waymo a really big footprint there, and it clears them to charge for fully driverless rides across the Bay Area and LA. And this is just one example of how Waymo has been expanding. It's now in 11 U.S. cities, and it's targeting 1 million rides per week by the end of the year. So they're really far ahead of competitors, including Tesla, in getting these rides out to the public and being able to charge for them. But it hasn't come without challenges, which you've covered, Molly, on the Waymo front. A lot of software issues. So these cars and the technology that powers them is still learning how to operate the way a human would, or better in some cases than a human would. Some have been seen driving through flooded roads or construction zones. Some have passed stopped school buses, which obviously human drivers know not to do. So still a learning curve, but really remarkable growth here in the California expansion.
What you said about the construction zones and flooding and passing stopped school buses thing reminded me also of, there was this research paper that came out a few weeks ago in partnership with Hunter College here in New York City, which actually parts of the safety analysis ended up getting retracted. But there was one part of the report that talked about some of the challenges with Waymo navigating curb access. And one of the things that the researchers flagged is how are Waymos going to pay for parking? Like in New York, there are places where they're going to have to pull over and wait where there's metered parking. So yeah, when you talk about software issues, and then that just raised for me a whole host of other questions about some of the logistical implications for a continued Waymo rollout.
Co-hosts Molly Boygon and Hannah Lutz talked on the latest episode of the Automotive News Shift podcast. You can hear the full conversation on the latest episode of Shift, available now wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up, the U.S. Canada trade deal blows up, and Trump turns up the heat. Automotive News Canada's David Kennedy on what happened and whether cooler heads can prevail. That's next on Daily Drive.
Fraud is no longer just a risk for auto dealers. It has become part of everyday operations. According to Experian Automotive, nearly 9 out of 10 dealers say fraud is a top concern, and 70% say it's on the rise. We're talking about real deals slipping through, costing dealerships $10,000, even $20,000 per incident. And it's not just one type of fraud. You've got forged income documents, fabricated salaries, synthetic identities, even trade-in scams. The worst part? Catching fraud often slows everything down, adding friction to deals and frustrating legitimate customers. That's where Experian Automotive's Fraud Protect solution comes in. It's designed specifically for dealers, helping you quickly detect income, identity, and trade-in ownership before it hits your bottom line. No guesswork, no unnecessary delays, just faster, more consistent verification so you can protect your profits while keeping the buying experience smooth. Because the goal isn't just to stop fraud, it's to keep good deals moving. Experian Automotive's Fraud Protect. No more. Risk less. Sell smarter.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. The collapse of trade talks between the U.S. and Canada are opening up a possible all-out trade war between the two countries. And right now, it's only escalating. David Kennedy is Toronto bureau chief of our sibling publication, Automotive News Canada. He spoke with our own Jake Neer about what led to that breakdown in talks and what comes next.
David Kennedy working very hard over the last few days from Canada there in Toronto. David, thanks so much for joining us on Daily Drive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. So last people heard here on Daily Drive on Friday, we pretty much had a deal. We thought that there was a deal in place. There was a tentative deal at the time. It still needed to be, finalized. But how did we go from that to a complete breakdown in the talks, David?
Yeah, well, it really did look like things were going to get shored up and that we were going to have an agreement between Ottawa and Washington on, auto and essentially everything else. But then all of a sudden, late Friday, things came off the rails. And it's obvious that a few different things got injected into these talks at the last minute. There's some debate over which side did it. But the long and short of it is that auto actually played a pretty big role in derailing some of these discussions. Medium and heavy duty pickups were sort of being separated from the rest of the light duty vehicles. And all those are, hit with 25% tariffs and have been for a while now coming into the US from Canada. The US wanted to see light duty vehicles get a lower tariff rate. The consensus is it was 15%. But they wanted a carve out for, medium and heavy duty pickups that, wouldn't get that exemption. So the tariff would remain at 25%. And Canada just said no. We need those trucks included. We know we build some of those pickups up here in Canada, and it affects larger vehicles, commercial vehicles as well. But we've got a brand new Super Duty assembly plant in Oakville. Ford just put about $5 billion Canadian into that plant, and they're going to start production kind of any day. GM builds the Silverado heavy duty in Oshawa. That's been one of the things that simply wasn't going to advance with these talks. And it's only one part of what broke things down, but it did seem like a fairly substantial one that both sides weren't willing to give on.
And now, today, news that President Trump is essentially saying he wants to put a 50% tariff rate on Canadian goods. What do we know? This is pretty fresh news right now, but what do we know so far about it?
Yeah, it's essentially the threat here is a 50% tariff on basically anything auto related coming in from Canada, which would be an enormous difference from what we have today. As much as we have those 25% vehicle tariffs, there's parts exemptions, and parts moving across the border are exempt entirely. So that 25% tariff on Canadian made vehicles actually is about half that, with parts exemptions. Canadian parts going to U.S. auto plants to go into vehicles that are built in the U.S. are exempt entirely from those tariffs. So going to 50% on all those products would be an enormous change, and obviously a huge escalation just over the weekend. But that was the fear here, that this would happen, or something like this would happen, that you get into this spiral of escalation that sort of leads off, and that's what we're seeing, at least first thing Monday morning from the president, is that we're going to have more and more of this, and things are going to get uglier before they get better.
I mean, this has the makings of an all-out trade war, it seems like right now, at least with the temperature of the room at the moment. I am curious, that 50%, would that, do you know if that would be an effective tariff rate, or would that be, is that sort of like the big number, but like what people actually pay would be significantly less, or would that actually be the effective rate?
I mean, at this point, it's all unknown. It's at this point, it's a Truth Social post, and that's it. And the timeline here is a little ways out. Should mention that as well. That the threat was January 1st of 2027. So you have to imagine here, this is just yet another bargaining tactic that we're seeing in all this. That it's meant to put the fear in Canada, so to speak, to come back to the table and cut the deal that Trump wants, as opposed to walking away, which we saw over the weekend. And that's what's going to be interesting about this, as we've seen from the rest of Trump discussions across the globe. A lot of countries have come to the table and cut a deal with the U.S. Canada is one of the few that has really put up any resistance. China is the other exception that has kind of pushed back and retaliated. And I think and Trump has come out and said this outwardly, that that's a point of frustration. The fact that Ottawa would retaliate against the United States is something that seems to irk him. Even though he obviously started this trade war with Canada, it seems to be a problem that Canada is willing to push back. And that's why Canada has been so much of focus, whereas you see less out of Mexico, for instance, which when you actually run the numbers is probably a bit more of an issue for the United States on trade than really Canada is.
Have we heard from any Canadian officials or experts about what essentially the impact is as of right now on the Canadian auto industry? It's so widespread, it's so sweeping that it seems like the impacts are also sort of generalized. But I'm curious, do you have any sense of what happens with production and what happens with exports that would be going over the border right now?
Yeah, I mean, so at the moment, nothing really changes. We've had these tariffs for months and months. At this point, over a year, have been the light duty vehicle tariffs. So those have been in place since April of last year, and people have adjusted accordingly. There have been some slowdowns at plants. There have been some plants that are pumping at full capacity and still shipping vehicles to the U.S. and simply eating the tariff. And then the parts sector has continued doing what it does, building parts, and all those parts at this point have been tariff free. So there's really been no effect on the parts sector. Even Linamar, for instance, big supplier up here, they had their quarterly earnings call a week or so ago, and they said they're still quoting and winning work for plants in Canada that are shipping to the U.S. And doing so at a rate that they haven't in years. So the thing is, at least so far, part suppliers are largely unaffected. There's some auto plants that have been affected, but to a limited degree. to what we could see if, things continue to escalate. And, all bets are off if we get to that 50% tariff rate. It's too early to really speculate on what could happen there, because I do think it's very much just a threat at this point. But, a 50% tariff is a huge number. And obviously you've got well beyond any talk of profit margin at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, David, you just talked about Canada and how it's prepared to retaliate as well. Is there, or escalate, if that is where they're sort of pushed, is there any off ramp for this once talks restarted? I mean, is there any way to avoid further and further escalation? Is there an opportunity somewhere to get back on track?
Yeah, well, you have to believe there is, right? There's no real way of knowing one way or the other which way we go on this. But at the same time, we really did seem quite close to a deal last week. I was skeptical at first when we first got the Truth Social post from Trump saying, we've got a deal, tariffs are off for a few days. And we're working on a deal till Friday. I was skeptical, but as the week wore on, it became pretty clear that both sides were working earnestly to try to get a deal done. So if they got that close, you have to imagine that the sides probably weren't as far off as it might seem Monday morning, and that we can get back to a place that makes sense. But it's also the thing that Canada has harped on for quite a while, and you hear it increasingly from the U.S. as well, is that this deal makes sense for both sides. The idea that this is some sort of zero-sum negotiation just doesn't apply. It's the trade deals benefit both sides of the border. The U.S. will get to continue to sell, vehicles in Canada among all the other things, and uninhibited as they have for a long time. Auto trade in particular is balanced between the two sides. Tens of billions of dollars come across the border both ways every year. And as long as we get a deal, that will continue and benefit the economies on both sides of the border. So you have to assume here that cooler heads will eventually prevail. But it's as I said earlier, I think we're going to get uglier here before things improve.
David Kennedy has been all over this story, and all of your Automotive News Canada colleagues as well. David, you guys have been putting in a lot of work to bring us the latest on these developments. Thank you so much, and thanks for joining us on Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me.
David Kennedy spoke with our own Jake Neer. You can read all of our reporting on U.S. Canada trade at autonews.com. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to our own Hans Greimel for his reporting for today's podcast. We also had reporting from Grace Macaluso of our sibling publication, Automotive News Canada. You can get the latest news on U.S. Canada trade talks, Unifor negotiations, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.